Welcome to Undertold Verbatim. I'm Solveig Rennan for the Undertold Stories Project. We report from all over the world for PBS NewsHour. We've talked to experts and people making a difference in their communities. In this podcast, we're revisiting those undertold stories to share extended interviews we've done with changemakers around the world.
십십 karpo tsa.
72, shaved bald and draped in flowing maroon robes, Barry Kerzin gently presses his stethoscope to the neck of an elderly Tibetan man. He's just as gentle with this patient as he is with a much more famous one, His Holiness, the Dalai Lama.
My messenger, go to Japan and go to Mongolia.
The Tibetan spiritual leader now calls Kerzin, a tall, white California native, his messenger to the medical world, a journey that took a classically trained Western doctor halfway across the globe to become a Buddhist monk.
Don't just do the wisdom, also do the love and the compassion. In fact, do them 50-50. Those were his words. And it was like a lightning bolt, really actually went through my heart.
Our correspondent, Fred de Sam Lazaro, sat down with Kerzin in his tiny abode in Dharamsala, India in 2015. He told Fred what inspired his mission to bring compassion back into a medical system dominated by technology and the bottom line.
What brought you here?
Yeah, I keep pinching myself, Fred. I don't know. The obvious answer is I was teaching at the University of Washington in the School of Medicine, and a friend of mine, Alan Wallace, came here in about 85 for the first Mind and Life conference. And during that conference, His Holiness made a public request to the 20 people that he would love to have a Western-trained physician come to Dharamsala and interdigitate different healthcare and medical systems, not to make them one, but to have all of them available for any one sick person. So if modern allopathic medicine wasn't working, then maybe we try Unani, Ayurveda, Tibetan medicine, Chinese herbal medicine, etc. And Alan came back to Seattle and he called me and he said, I've got something for you. And I heard that and I said, wow. And so I then extricated some of my responsibilities and took 2 months, I think nearly 2 months off, and came here and talked to the people, around the Tibetan medicine world here. And it seemed to me like a go. I said, wow, this could be something really special for my life and something that I could really contribute for the people here, their lives. And then I got more involved with Buddhism. I'd already been very interested. I got more involved with meditation, with study, and I ended up extending my stay, and that's happened again and again, and here I am 27 years.
What drew you here in particular as opposed to the many other places you might have gone?
His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. I met him, first time we had a personal talk was in 1989 when he publicly was acknowledged for winning the Nobel Peace Prize. And there I got to talk to him and actually asked for some advice about a meditation retreat. And I felt like a lightning bolt was going right through my heart. I can still feel it right now. His answer basically to my question was, don't just do the wisdom, also do the love and the compassion. In fact, do them 50-50. Those were his words. Wisdom and compassion 50-50. And it was like a lightning bolt, really actually went through my heart. And that was the reason why I wanted to then stay and at least sometime longer. I wasn't thinking 27 years at that time, but I was thinking longer. And I left my post as an assistant professor at the University of Washington. And things were kind of open-ended here. I continued to practice medicine. He always encouraged me to keep my credentials and to continue practicing medicine. So now for 27 years, it's been all on a charitable basis. Don't charge anybody anything. And if I know they don't have the funds, I'll help them pay often for their medications. So that was the reason that it was a heart thing. It wasn't intellectual.
You say that he told you not only to do the wisdom, but to do the compassion. Do you have a sense now of what your condition was, if that's the right word, prior to that moment? I mean, what was your approach in life? How was it different from what he was telling you to do?
Before that point, and maybe a few years after that point, my life was filled with anxiety. My life was filled with doubt. My life was filled with not really knowing on a deeper level who I was and what I was, what I was supposed to do here during the time of my life. Meeting His Holiness and then following, a lifestyle here, trying to go more in terms of wisdom and compassion, has opened my heart. Didn't happen overnight, but has opened my heart to a large degree. Has brought tremendous peace, and anxiety is pretty much gone. I rarely feel anxiety anymore. And inner joy, inner peace is there, not all the time, but it's there a lot of the time. It's kind of a base or a background that's there. And so it's moved me along, slowly moved me along to be more compassionate, to learn how to do that, and to be less selfish. To be less preoccupied with my own needs. And so that's kind of been my journey.
What specifically, were you doing that was making you anxious before, that was filling you with doubt?
I think illness was the big mover here. And illness involves three. When I was 11, I nearly died of a brain abscess. And I think, going through that, I don't remember being fearful or anxious that much as an 11-year-old kid. But afterwards, very anxious. Then, when I was maybe in my early mid-20s, my mother, who I'd been extremely close to, and I always had the feeling that if any major catastrophe happened in my life, my mother would always be there for me. My mother developed a severe form of cancer and 9 months later died. And that, I felt like the rug of my life had been pulled out from under me. Then, or just before she died, maybe several years before she died, I met a woman who was spectacular. She was beautiful outside, beautiful inside, and I just felt like a whole person being around her. So much of my self-doubt, not all of it, but much of it vanished, went away. We were together for about, the math, I don't know, but we were together maybe 7 years, 8 years, when she was diagnosed in her early 30s, when she was 30, with a very serious form of ovarian cancer, very serious form of cancer, and it was advanced when she was diagnosed. 3.5 years later, she died. And that sent me in another loop downward. I was reckless. There were several things that I did that, looking back, were reckless. In nature, because I love nature and love to spend time in nature. So 3 or 4 times I was doing things that were stupid, that I wouldn't have otherwise done. For example, I was rafting in a sea kayak, kayaking in a sea kayak on a river in the winter in the very northwest of America, in the Quinault River Basin. And I was alone. My skirt had been lost, so I didn't have a skirt on my sea kayak. And I portaged my boat because there was a 90-degree turn. I was going up from Quinault, Lake Quinault, going up the river, And I was fighting it, but I was working as hard as I could. And I came to a 90-degree bend. There was white water. I portage took the boat out, and I hiked with my boat above the white water, got in, and I thought this would be really neat to run these rapids. Not knowing what I'm doing, I was a sea kayaker. So I tried to do it, and there were 2 logs down. I came and I hit one of the logs, and immediately my boat came 90 degrees from the way the water was going, and my boat filled up because I didn't have my skirt, and I rolled, and I was upside down. I got out, maybe because there was no skirt. I got out, but I couldn't come up. The white water was too strong, and it was taking me down. I tried as hard as I could to come up to get some air. Finally, I did. Got some air. It took me down again. Again, I'm trying to fight to get back up. I can't. Finally, I can. And then the white water is finished. Still a lot of turbulence, but I could stay up. And then I remember thinking, I'm fine. But then a voice came that said, you're not fine. If you don't get out of this river, you're going to die. I was probably at that point I was hypothermic beyond shivering. I was very, very cold. And so I'm going down the river, no control, and I see a log kind of coming up like this. All the strength I had, I lifted my arms and I grabbed the log. Again, I thought, I'm okay. And again, a voice said, no, you've got to get out of this river, you won't survive. So I went hand over hand and got to the edge of the river. It was about 6 foot vertical. And I said to myself, there's no way I'm going to get out of this. Another voice said, if you're going to survive, you got to get out of this river. And it must have been adrenaline. I just went into the side. It was mud, and probably there were some, roots and things that I must have grabbed on. I don't remember. And I got up to the top and got over. It was dark by now. I'd lost my boots. I had on my Gore-Tex upper and lower. It was completely soaked. I'm blind without my glasses. But at that time I had the full wraparounds. John Lennon glasses wraparounds. They stayed on. And then I kind of got myself, I could stand up. I'm in the middle of nowhere. I don't know where I'm going to go. If I had to be out that night, none of my gear was with me, I would have froze. So I decided just to walk. And after a while, I found a little path made of gravel. I thought, okay, this goes to somewhere. There was a cabin, it was locked up, nobody there. Then there was a driveway, a dirt driveway. I followed it, came to finally a road, a small road, no cars, no people. I said to myself, right or left? And some kind of intuition, I don't know, just said, go right. So I went right, and I'm walking, and then I could see a sign that had a reflector in it. I couldn't read it, but I knew there was a sign. Kept walking, and it said, Quinault River Station, quarter mile. I said, wow, maybe I'm going to be okay. But I had no idea if there was anybody there. So I walked the quarter mile, and I saw smoke coming out of a smokestack. Went in, and there were 2 guys. One guy's name was Rambo, 2 park rangers. And they took care of me. They took everything off. They had a fire going. They warmed me up, gave me something to wear, and I survived. So that recklessness of doing what I did on the river was because I really didn't care if I was going to live or die. I wasn't actively suicidal, but I was reckless. And there are several other situations in nature just like that, where I nearly died, but I didn't. In this case, they told me I should have died because those logs that are laying down are Doug fir, and they have branches coming out 90 degrees. So those things are going straight down, and they catch you when you're down. They're called widowmakers. And they said, you're really lucky that you were able to come up and survive.
Do you think you were lucky, or do you think there was something else at what?
At the time, I probably would have called it luck. But now, this may sound foolish, and I'm a doctor, I'm a scientist, and I think like a scientist, but for many years now, I've had this feeling, and it's true, and it's been tested, that I'm kind of under this umbrella where I'm protected and cared for by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. There have been events later where I could have been in huge trouble, maybe died, and I came out in flying colors. I had a pulmonary embolism in Mongolia a year ago, a little over a year ago, and the medicine that you need to get yourself better, an anticoagulant, Coumadin, they told me we don't have this in this country. I learned later that a few places have it, but that's what I was told. Somehow, magically, somebody who I had worked with, a kind of a student, had done business in Beijing, and she heard about this, and she called her student colleague and said, look, get this stuff sent. Next day it arrived on a plane from Beijing, Coumadin. And I got the Coumadin. And I'm sure this wasn't just luck. I'm sure that His Holiness looks out for me. There are many, many examples of this. So as a scientist, I actually believe this is true.
Is that a difficult thing? Is that a difficult reconciliation? How long did it take you to get to this point of being a scientist? I mean, all of these, the incident you just described to us was, happened before, I presume, you met
Yes.
His Holiness. How long did it take you to make it seem like a revelation to you?
I don't know, maybe a couple decades. But it's been that way for at least a decade, if not more. I used to say I wear two hats. So sometimes this is the medical hat, this is the Buddhist hat, but I don't say that anymore. And I do think that our modern scientific knowledge is limited. There are many things we don't know. And I think there are many things in Buddhist science that modern science is getting closer to accepting, or at least accepting the possibility that they may exist. And so I'm more kind of in that mode.
For example?
The mind. His Holiness mentioned this morning. The dictum in neuroscience has been the brain. Emotions are all explained in behavior, neuroscience of the brain, chemical neurotransmitters, chemical synapses, etc., between neurons in the brain. And now some of the top scientists, particularly those that have had a lot of exposure to His Holiness, are starting to say, maybe there is something about mind that's separate from the brain, particularly very subtle mental states. They don't say it's true, but they're beginning to entertain the possibility, and they're starting to research it.
When you travel globally and you flip between several different worlds, how do you view your medical colleagues? How do you feel you're viewed by medical colleagues you encounter, especially ones that you've known for some time before you became a Tibetan Buddhist?
Let me give two answers to that, two threads. First is, in my travels around the world for the last 10 years, often with medical community, giving talks, lectures, I've noticed a change. Initially, they viewed me with lots of suspicion and who is this guy, and not much interest to listen. Now, this has changed tremendously. And doctors, nurses, other health professionals are coming up to me in many parts of the world after a talk. They're saying, we really need this stuff for ourselves so we don't burn out, become depressed, turn to alcohol, drugs, divorce, and maybe suicide. So we need it for ourselves to maintain our sanity and maybe even our mental health and happiness. But we also need it for our patients. There's been a tremendous problem that's come in the area of trust in the doctor-patient relationship. Now, the second strand are doctors that know me over this period of time, for a long time. And I think initially they thought I went off the deep end. What are you doing living in India? Come on. How can you stay healthy? Why don't you come back and, you could have a very good life. You could have a very good academic life in medicine. You could have a very comfortable economic life. It's ridiculous what you're doing. This happened, by the way, more from American doctors than British doctors. British doctors understand the Indian situation much better than American doctors because of the long history. As I started to grow as an individual, and I don't claim to much growth, but little bit has changed in me. My close friends who I've known for years, particularly doctors, all friends, but now we're talking about the doctors, they saw the changes that happened to me personally. And slowly they start to take notice. What's happened to you? This is neat stuff. You're smiling all the time. I feel good being around you. You seem to now, people are kind of looking at what you're doing and respecting it. What's happening here? And they start asking the question. And so slowly I started telling the people, well, I don't know, but this is just kind of how things have developed. So I think over time, those doctors that have known me a long time are beginning to recognize that there's something valuable here. It's not me, but it's the tradition that I've been steeped in that can help a person grow this way to find deeper meaning in their life.
Well, have you got others who are interested in joining you?
Tremendous amount of others that are interested. Now that doesn't mean they're giving up their family life, their professional life, no. But I've started, I'm the founder and president of a nonprofit organization that is registered in the United States. It's globally active. It has a 501c3, and for tax deduction donations. It's called Altruism in Medicine Institute. And that institute is drawing a lot of people. We don't have any money, so everybody is working there, including myself. It's all volunteer. We now have about a dozen volunteers because they love it. Some of them are professionals. I've got doctors doing it. I've got super specialist IT people doing it because they love it. They feel that there's something meaningful there. So people are starting to join, the cause. So I think that there's beginning to be a recognition, particularly in healthcare, of where there are cracks in the system, and that we need something to improve this, get it back on a good track. So these things I don't think are the full answer, but they're probably one of a number of answers that can help medicine get back on track in America and in many places in the world.
What primarily derailed it in your mind?
That's a good question. I don't know, because I've been away from it a lot. I haven't lived in America for 27 years now. I think part of it is greed. It used to be that the doctors controlled pretty much what happened, made the decisions in the hospitals, etc. That's been taken out of the hands of the doctors. It's been put in the hands of more corporate-minded people. I think that's been one problem. A second problem is, doctors and nurses and all the healthcare professionals, it's not part of our education, compassion. And so we all went into this because we wanted to help. But then once we're in it, there's so many other factors. Economics is one. You have to pay for your education by taking out loans. And then when you get out of medical school or nursing school, you have a huge bill to pay. So you've got to work to pay back those bills. And then you get more involved with the economic side. You want a second car, a nicer home, a nicer travel, vacation. And so then you start to get, a little bit derailed into the kind of the economic side of things. So that's a second factor, I think. A third factor is, unfortunately, and I don't know all the reasons, modern medicine has become so stressful for everybody. People are burning out, or if they're not burned out, they're highly stressed and depressed, and they don't feel well anymore about what they do. I think that's another factor that's led to some of the cracks in the modern medical system.
Do you today pretty much call yourself a renunciate, as they say in India? I mean, have you foregone all material possessions?
Yeah, I would say yes and no. I don't own a home. I don't own a car. I don't own a refrigerator. And I can go on and on that. I do have a little storage locker in the States where I keep some of my stuff. Most of it is books. And that's the possessions. I do have a little money in a pension plan that from when I worked years and years ago. I owned a house, and many years ago I sold it, and so that money was put into kind of a pension plan. And that's it. So I'm not a renunciate, in the sense that His Holiness mentioned the monk has 3 possessions, basically what we're wearing in a bowl, for our food. I'm not that kind of a renunciate, but I'm certainly much more of a renunciate than all the doctors I know. And, I feel that I have, renunciation to me is not exactly just giving away all your material possessions. It's rather detachment. So that if what you have as material possessions were to go like that, no problem, because you're not attached to them. So I see renunciation more like that. So to have a few things is okay. Have a lot of things is not okay. But to have a few things like I have, I feel it's okay because I'm not very attached to these things.
Can you walk us briefly through the landmarks of that path to where you called yourself a full Tibetan monk?
Yeah, and I think that does nicely dovetail with the detachment because it is a process and it takes time. So after I met His Holiness in '89, I had much more energy to do meditation retreats and study that included compassion along with the wisdom. I've always loved the emptiness. That's been my original kind of hook since childhood, since age 14. Is Buddhist wisdom of emptiness. But His Holiness, very firmly and powerfully said, compassion, don't forget the compassion. And so I've been studying, I've been doing meditation retreats for decades, now teaching for a decade, and all of that, you can't ignore that stuff. You can't ignore, what do you do when incipient anger comes up? How do you work with it? Do you just leave it and get angry? Or do you try to make the commitment, okay, I'm going to try to transform it into, patience, tolerance, or even love and compassion. So you're kind of forced when you're doing this stuff for so long not to be a hypocrite. You sort of have to, you're telling other people to do that work, so you have to do it yourself. And so I tried. I'm not saying I was a very good student. I'm not saying I was very successful at it. I think I wasn't. But you keep plugging away, and little by little, year by year, you start to make some kind of progress. And so I think that's happened. I don't get angry very much anymore. It's rare. It happens, but not much. If it happens, I see it, I work with it, it doesn't stay long. Same thing with jealousy. I don't get jealous, rarely. I used to be much more of a jealous person. I used to be highly competitive. I'm still somewhat competitive, but it's more now personal competition to better myself, not putting somebody else down, not at the expense of somebody else. So these are things that you just learn. That's what I teach. And I slowly work on myself. And I think, the practice is incredible. The teachings of the Buddha that come down through Nagarjuna and His Holiness the Dalai Lama are incredible because they work. If you do them, they work. And once you start to taste that wow, I didn't get angry in this situation. I would have used to gotten angry. Or, I'm smiling and I'm telling that person, wow, it's so wonderful the success you've had. I didn't get jealous. You start feeling that, you start seeing that, and it's a little like endorphins. It kind of sucks you in. You want more of that because it feels good, and you feel that your life is more meaningful.
What were the components of that that helped you transform that demeanor from being one prone to anger or jealousy, the things that you've conquered mostly?
Yeah. I think it's a combination of meditation and also, as His Holiness calls, emotional hygiene. Not suppressing the destructive emotions like anger, jealousy, pride, attachment, greed, selfishness. Not suppressing them, because that doesn't work, because those just come back and blow up and they're worse. But rather, actually, it's like you churn butter. You start with cream. You keep churning and churning and churning, and pretty soon, all you've got is butter. If you look for the cream, you can't find it. There's no residual of cream. So the cream was totally transformed into butter. So that's the kind of process we're talking about, where jealousy, when you do successfully transform it into, appreciation or feeling joy about the other person's success, there's no residual of that jealousy. It's totally transformed.
Can you talk a little bit more about meditation, how you started, and share with people who do not practice meditation, how, in a way that we can understand how you began, and just talk about meditation and its impact on your life?
Myself, and I think this is true for many people, our orientation is outward. I always used to be very involved with planning, worrying about the past. I could have done this different. I should have done this. I should have done that. Guilt, worry, anxiety. The more you meditate, you automatically come and spend more time in the present. When I'm not in the past, and I'm not in the future, and I'm in the present, there's a tremendous joy. There's a tremendous deep relaxation. There's no room for anxiety. There's very little room for doubt. Self-doubt or doubting anything. I mean, you still have a very healthy inquiry. You're not sure about this, you want to explore this, you don't know that. That's there. But kind of a destructive self-doubt and doubting others, negative judgment stuff, there's no room for that when you spend more time in the present.
That's where it begins, and then it goes deeper.
Yes. It goes deeper primarily in compassion and wisdom. So compassion, the stepping stone is kind of empathy, to feel what the other person is feeling. That takes us out of ourself into the other person. So it's wonderful. But if we leave it there, we burn out, particularly, professionals, particularly health professionals, we burn out because we own so much pain. So then we have to move on to compassion. To feel happy about helping another person, but that compassion is tinged with pain, because we're feeling a little bit the pain of the other person, but we're not being overwhelmed. We're not owning that. So that's a next step, if you will, stepping stone. And then another stepping stone is helping without expecting anything in return. So now, commonly in relationship we say, or we may not say this, but it's kind of, known to both parties, I'll love you if you love me. Or you help somebody and you're expecting a thank you, or a smile, or something in return. So the next step is helping without any expectation for anything in return. And the basis of that is recognizing the commonality that we all share. We're normally caught up in differences, all the differences, and we forget the commonality. And the commonality is that none of us wants to hurt. We all want to feel well. And the more we remember that, the more we practice this little bit more advanced level of compassion, helping just because the other person wants to be well.
And your own inner peace comes as a result of that.
Exactly. As a result of that, you feel happy. You feel inner peace. Now, if you did it with that motivation, it would be a very selfish kind. It would be compassion, but it would be a low level, a very selfish kind of compassion, if you did it because it makes you feel good.
But as a byproduct,
As a byproduct, you feel marvelous. You feel there's deep meaning in your life. You go to bed often feeling very happy. You wake up feeling very happy. You feel you've touched a sense of real deep meaning in your life. And so I call that a win-win situation.
Our interview with Barry Kerzin was originally featured in our story called The Dalai Lama's Doctor, which aired on PBS NewsHour on October 15th, 2015. To check out the full story, go to undertoldstories.org. This episode was hosted by me, Solveig Rennan, and produced and edited by Simeon Lancaster. The interview was conducted by our director, Fred DeSam Lazaro. Our next few episodes will explore bringing water access to the Navajo Nation.
We're looking at about 70,000 people without access to water sanitation.
And how Edna Adan is caring for the mothers and babies of her motherland.
I don't think I could have gone to a PhD course to learn how to do this. I think it's life that has taught me.
You can find every Undertold Verbatim episode, virtual reality 360 experiences, and our entire library of Undertold news reports from around the world at undertoldstories.org. Undertold Verbatim is brought to you by the Undertold Stories Project, based at the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota. As always, thanks for your support.